Saint Paul, Christian apostle. The most important teacher in the history of Christianity was Saint Paul, the first systematic theologian and author of the Christian Church. He served as the apostle to the Gentiles for the Christian Church. Paul, whose birth name was Saul or Shall, was born to Jewish parents from the tribe of Benjamin in the town of Tarsus in Cilicia. His parents were both citizens of Rome. Koine Greek, the common tongue of all educated Roman people across the empire, is likely Paul's earliest language. Paul was sent to Jerusalem at a young age to study the Bible. He gained a profound understanding of the law while studying under a renowned rabbi named Gamaliel. He also learnt to write in both Greek and Hebrew. It appears to be a given that Paul attended school in Jerusalem for the first 3 years of Jesus' public ministry and that he was present when the Romans crucified the man. He might have even heard and witnessed Jesus preach. He undoubtedly was aware of Jesus and his activities among the populace. Paul's times. When Paul was alive, the Second Jewish Commonwealth was coming to an end. He was a young man studying rabbinic theology at a time when Palestine was already entirely ruled by the Romans. The Jewish people were no longer truly an independent country. Israel's original borders, which were established by the Hasmonean and Solomonian kingdoms before them, had been significantly shrunk. Rome liked to divide its captive populations into manageable provinces in order to administer them. The situation in Palestine had deteriorated by the time Paul had become a Christian and had begun his long missionary travels. After King Agrippa's death, the peace and relative stability that had persisted during his rule were seriously disrupted. The Pharisees, who made up the elite Jewish class, developed a new sense of nationalism and resistance against the foreign invader. The younger generation of Pharisees in Palestine influenced the populace's mindset in such a way that the 66 AD Jewish uprising and subsequent destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD became inevitable. Paul gained a good understanding of both the oral and written Jewish law from his early education. He also gained knowledge of the conventional rabbinic approach to scriptural analysis and interpretation. Thus, Paul was the inheritor of the lengthy, extensive, and diverse Pharisaic tradition that reached its zenith during the last days of the Second Temple, because he was given permission by the Jewish authorities to locate and bring charges against members of a new sect that claimed Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, and that the kingdom of God was close at hand. It appears that Paul had established a stellar reputation while still a young rabbinic student. Paul reportedly made multiple journeys across Palestine looking for Christians. Around the year 34 AD, Paul made one of these journeys from Jerusalem to Damascus and was completely transformed. Paul's conversion. There are 4 accounts of Paul's conversion. These sources all share a common theme. Paul had a supernatural experience that caused him to think that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah and that God had sent him to preach the gospel of Jesus to all people. According to the narrative, he was blinded and had to fast for 3 days before a Christian named Ananias touched him and healed him, which led to his baptism. This incident is typically dated to occur between 34 and 36 AD. The following 3 years of Paul's life were spent in Damascus with the Christians. Peter and the other Christians welcomed him when he eventually made his way back to Jerusalem. Paul spent the next 6 years preaching in various locations throughout Syria and Cilicia before returning to his hometown of Tarsus. He and Barnabas spent their final year at Antioch before being given the go-ahead by the Christian authorities to spread the gospel to the neighboring countries. Missionary journeys. Paul traveled extensively throughout the eastern Mediterranean region 3 times during the course of the following 15 years. Paul traveled through a region of the world that was under the Pax Romana's protection at the time. Paul had no trouble speaking or traveling. Roman garrisons maintained a network of well-protected and well-preserved roadways that connected fortified and affluent towns throughout the eastern Mediterranean. All communication took place in Koine Greek, which was widely used throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Mail-based correspondence was a common and daily form of communication. The principal Greek islands, Palestine, Turkey, Greece, Italy, and North Africa all had broad maritime passages for commerce and passenger travel. Jews lived in sporadic but well-organized communities in all the major cities throughout the eastern Mediterranean. There was frequent connection between these Jewish communities and the central government in Jerusalem. The Jewish communities outside of Palestine relied on the Palestinian government to set the Jewish calendar, regulate the Jewish year, allow sacrifices to be made in the temple, and generally vouch for the authenticity of teachers, scrolls, and ideologies. Paul lived in various Jewish communities up to the last few years of his life. The later conflict between Paul and the Jews and between Christianity and Judaism has frequently disguised this truth. Paul was only not welcomed in the Jewish town's synagogues at the conclusion of his life. Only during the final 20 years of the 1st century were synagogues generally closed to Christians. Approximately 45 AD was the start of Paul's first voyage, which led him through Cyprus and southeast Turkey before returning to Antioch along the same route. On his second journey, Paul traveled by land through Turkey, mainland Greece, Athens, and Rhodes before making his way back to Palestine that same year. Around 52 AD, he arrived in Tyre on the coast of Palestine. Paul penned his 2 letters to the Thessalonians during this second tour. On his third tour, Paul left Antioch, once more traversed Turkey, paid visits to Ephesus and Chios, and then continued through Macedonia to pay another visit to mainland Greece. From the Palestinian port of Tyre on Turkey's southwest coast, he traveled back home by sea. Paul wrote his letter to the Galatians, his 2 letters to the Corinthians, and his letter to the Romans during this third tour. Paul penned a number of letters between the start of his missionary missions and his death, which subsequently became a part of the Christian New Testament. He wrote 13 letters in all before his passing. A 14th letter, historically attributed to Paul, the letter to the Hebrews, is now largely accepted to have been written by one of Paul's followers. Paul's teaching was based on 3 key ideas. The Mosaic law had been repealed and replaced by the law of Jesus as a result of Jesus' salvation, making him the Son of God and the Messiah prophesied by the Israelite prophets. Through his death, Jesus had atoned for all of mankind's sins and opened heaven to all. Therefore, there was no longer a difference between Jews and non-Jews. The rabbinic approach of exegesis, which Paul mastered in Jerusalem, was frequently utilized to interpret biblical texts in order to support his arguments. Teaching methods. Paul's teaching strategies remained constant throughout his travels for missions. He first preached to the Jews in each town he visited by going to the synagogue or other Jewish community gathering place. Then he gave a sermon to the local Gentiles. The Jewish communities, however, began to oppose Paul more and more as his reputation and area of preaching grew. Then, the emphasis of his sermons shifted more and more toward non-Christians. Paul endured extreme physical and social hardships from both Jews and Gentiles, including being stoned, whipped, imprisoned, treated inhumanely, and exiled on multiple occasions. From the start of his apostolate, he formed a pretty scathing critique of his former co-religionists, contending that by upholding the law of Moses and rejecting Jesus, they were foregoing their destiny as God's chosen people. As a result, Paul faced increasing resistance from Jewish communities outside of Palestine, and word of his threat to Judaism in the diaspora seeped back to Jerusalem. Final journey. After his third missionary trip, Paul returned to Jerusalem and suggested a trip to Rome and Spain. While he was there, he was recognized by some Asian Jews, who assaulted him right away for being a problem and outlaw in the Jewish community. Paul was spared from the ensuing brawl by the Roman civil authority who stepped in. The disturbances caused, Paul was detained. He was spared death since he was a Roman citizen, and after that, he was moved to Caesarea, the Roman government's coastal capital, where Felix, the procurator, tried him. Paul made use of his right as a Roman citizen to be transferred to Rome for trial by Caesar in order to avoid being sent back to Jerusalem for trial, where he would have been sentenced to death. At the spring of 60 AD, he arrived in Rome following a sea expedition. He wrote his letters to the Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, Philemon, Timothy, and Titus during his years of imprisonment in Rome. Other than the possibility that he visited Spain before passing away, little is known about his later life. All accounts agree that he was crucified in Rome sometime between 66 and 67 AD.